I think I'd be hard pressed to find many horror fans that would disagree with the statement that John Carpenter is one of the most important directors in all of horror, possibly even all of cinema. And for a lot of people, when they think of John Carpenter, their mind immediately goes to a pale face killer that stalks on a specific holiday. Tune in later on this year. There will be time to talk about that masterpiece. But the thing is, that's far from his only masterpiece. See, John Carpenter also created what's become known as the Apocalypse Trilogy, that sets off with one of the classics in all of horror, The Thing. Now, these three films are not simply connected by tone or by a director or by the fact that the world might end. They're connected by a deeper kind of collapse. Each one takes something human beings rely on and slowly removes it. And the thing begins with identity. Prince of Darkness will move into the structure of reality itself, and the Mouth of Madness will go even further into story, perception, and the possibility that reality can be rewritten by forces outside of us. But before Carpenter tears open the universe, he starts with something far more intimate and in some ways more frightening than all of that. He starts with the question of whether the person standing in front of you is actually the person you think they are. That's why The Thing is not just a monster movie, even though it has one of the greatest monsters ever put to screen. It's not just a survival movie, even though survival is constantly in question. It's not just paranoia horror, even though paranoia becomes the atmosphere that everybody breathes. This is cosmic horror compressed into a handful of rooms in the middle of Antarctica. The scale is enormous, but the setting is small. The threat is planetary, but the fear is personal. Because the real horror is not simply that something alien has entered the camp. The real horror is that once it enters, identity stops being trustworthy. Recognition stops working. The human face becomes suspect, and when that happens, everything that makes human community possible begins to collapse. The film opens with the image of a spacecraft falling toward Earth. And even though the rest of the story will be so grounded in snow, machinery, sweat, fire, and human tension, that opening places the threat immediately outside the ordinary boundaries of human life. Something has come from beyond us. Something has entered the world from a place that we do not understand. And before we even meet the men in Outpost 31, the film has already told us that the true source of horror is not human. Then we cut to Antarctica in 1982, and the first image on the ground is almost absurdly simple: a dog running across an empty white landscape while a helicopter chases it. There's something wrong about that image before we even know why. A dog should feel harmless. A dog should feel familiar. In a landscape as cold and empty as this, a dog should almost feel like a sign of life, companionship, or domestic warmth. But the men in the helicopter are trying desperately to kill it. They're firing rifles, shouting in Norwegian, missing shots that they should be able to make, and their urgency feels too intense for what we're seeing. The Americans at the outpost are confused because they're seeing what we're seeing. A dog is being hunted, and the hunters, they look irrational. But that's the first trap that the film sets. The Americans interpret the situation according to the surface of things, and the surface of things is woefully wrong. The Norwegians die before they can communicate what they know. One blows himself up with a grenade, the other is shot after firing wildly and injuring Bennings. The warning does not merely fail, it's cut off completely. The only people who understand the danger are gone, and the thing they are trying to stop is taken inside the American camp, as if it were a victim. This is the first expression of the movie's central horror. The threat enters not through brute force, but through misrecognition. The men believe they're saving a dog, and because their interpretation is wrong, they welcome the end of the world into their shelter. Once the dog is inside, Carpenter does not reach. That is one of the reasons the movie's dread works so well. The dog moves through the base quietly. It watches, it waits, it enters rooms and observes people without calling attention to itself. It doesn't behave like a monster because it doesn't need to. The horror is not in what it does yet, but in the gap between what we suspect and what the characters understand. We're sitting with knowledge that has not been confirmed, and that tension makes every ordinary moment feel wrong. The base is still functioning. Men are still working, playing games, drinking, watching TV, complaining, existing in the strange routine of isolation. But something has entered the system, and the system doesn't know it's infected. When the kennel scene finally arrives, it doesn't feel like a jump into horror so much as a rupture in reality. The dog is placed with the others, and at first the space still feels ordered. Animals are in cages, men outside a contained environment. But then the dog begins to change. And even that word feels too clean for what happens. It does not transform from one recognizable form into another. It opens up, it splits, it unfolds into shapes that seem to have no stable endpoint. Its face peels apart, tendrils push outward, flesh becomes something unstable and searching. And for a few seconds, the mind struggles to understand whether this is one organism or several, one body or a swarm of possible bodies trying to happen at once. The other dogs panic before any human fully understands what's happening. And that matters because animals respond beneath language, beneath categories. They don't need a theory. They know something is wrong because life itself is reacting to a violation of life. Clark's hesitation when he sees it is deeply human. He sees the impossible and freezes for a split second between perception and comprehension. MacReady responds with fire, but even fire only solves the immediate problem. It stops what's happening in the kennel. It does not restore the world that existed before the kennel, because now the men have seen something that cannot be put back into ordinary categories. If this were simply an animal, even a dangerous alien animal, the problem would still be understandable. It could be hunted, trapped, studied, killed. But what the kennel reveals is not just a character, it's not just a creature, it's a process. It does not merely kill living things, it breaks them down. It absorbs them, replicates them, and replaces them. The dogs are not just being attacked, they're being undone. And that is much colder in its expression of horror than predation. See, predation leaves the victim dead. This leaves the victim's form walking around as a lie. When the Americans go to the Norwegian camp, the story expands from immediate terror into aftermath. The camp feels like a place where explanation died. There are signs of panic, violence, fire, failure. The men find the remains of people who clearly encountered the truth before them and didn't live to tell the tale. The most important discovery is the burned, malformed body outside, a grotesque fusion of human shapes that looks like imitation interrupted mid process. It's human enough to horrify and inhuman enough to make the word human unstable. When they bring it back to the American camp, they're not bringing back evidence that clarifies the situation. They're bringing back proof that reality is stranger and far more dangerous than they are ready to accept. Blair's examination of the organism becomes one of the film's crucial turning points because it takes the horror down to the cellular level. The thing is not merely wearing a disguise in the superficial sense. It's not a creature putting on a costume. It assimilates from within. It absorbs and replicates cell by cell. It does not need to understand personhood in order to mimic the signs of a person. It needs biology, time, and opportunity. That's why the microscope sequence is so unsettling. The apocalypse is not dramatic yet. It's quiet, almost clinical. It's one cell overtaking another. The end of humanity beginning at a scale too small to see with the naked eye. And then Blair runs the simulation. This is where the film's cosmic horror fully announces itself without spectacle. The computer estimates that if the organism reaches civilization, the human race is screwed. It could be assimilated in a matter of years, perhaps far less depending on exposure. The exact mechanics matter less than the implication. This thing does not need armies. It does not need weapons. It does not need to conquer us in the way human beings imagine conquest. It only needs contact. It only needs one successful escape. And once that possibility becomes real, the goal of the film changes entirely. The question is no longer how these men survive. The question is whether they have the right to survive if survival risks letting the organism reach the world. That's one of the darkest moves in the film. See, usually in horror, survival is the moral center. We want the characters to get out. We want rescue. We want civilization to arrive and restore order. But in The Thing, rescue itself becomes dangerous. Escape becomes dangerous. Contact with the outside world becomes dangerous. The men are trapped, but the world is protected by their being trapped. Antarctica, which at first feels like a hostile prison, becomes the only thing preventing global assimilation. The isolation that threatens them is also the last boundary between humanity and replacement. Blair sees this more clearly than anyone else in the movie, and that's why his breakdown is so disturbing. On the surface, he loses control. He destroys radios, sabotages vehicles, kills the remaining dogs, and makes sure that no one can leave or communicate. But the horror is that his actions are not disconnected from reason. They are reason under unbearable pressure. If anyone might be infected, then rescue is a threat. If communication brings help, help could carry the organism out. If a helicopter or snow vehicle survives, then the world remains vulnerable. Blair is dangerous, but his danger comes from understanding that the stakes too quickly become unable to remain human under the weight of that knowledge. That's where the film's paranoia becomes more than a mood. It becomes the only rational response to a rather irrational reality. See, the men need each other to survive the cold, the isolation, and the organism, but needing each other is exactly what makes them vulnerable. Trust is not merely weakened, it becomes logically indefensible. Every familiar face is now a possible mask. Every voice is a performance that might be real or might be imitation. Every absence becomes suspicious. Every private conversation becomes dangerous. The base begins to feel smaller and smaller, not because the walls move inward, but because the men can no longer share space innocently. The sabotage of the blood supply pushes the breakdown further. For a moment, there might have been a clean answer, a medical procedure that could separate the human from the imitation, but the stored blood is destroyed, and with it goes the hope that the problem can be handled through ordinary systems. Authority collapses with the blood. Gary, who should be in charge, becomes suspect because he had access. Cooper's medical role can no longer stabilize the group. Blair's scientific authority has already led to madness. MacReady's authority emerges only because he's willing to act decisively in a world where normal authority no longer functions properly. Leadership in this film is not legitimacy. It is the ability to make brutal decisions under uncertainty. Benning's partial assimilation is one of the film's most tragic moments because it shows how quickly personhood can be lost. Bennings is still recognizable, yet no longer safely himself. When he's burned outside, the men are no longer destroying a monster, they're burning the remains of a person who has already been stolen. This is what makes the creature so disturbing. It does not merely take life away, it makes the living body evidence that life has been overridden. The same dread surrounds Funches. He tries to follow the logic, reads Blair's notes, begins to understand that even small pieces of the organism could be dangerous, and then he disappears into the storm. When his burned body is found outside, it raises more questions than it answers. Did he burn himself to avoid assimilation? Was he killed? Was he already compromised? The film refuses to turn every death into certainty. Even the dead do not settle the matter. The dead become another form of ambiguity, another sign that knowledge in this world arrives too late and incomplete. By the time MacReady is suspected, the paranoia has become almost self sustaining. MacReady is cut loose in the storm and left outside, which is the perfect expression of the film's moral collapse. Exiling someone might save the group, or it might condemn an innocent man. Letting him back in might preserve a human life, or it might doom everyone. There's no clean moral decision because the creature has made certainty unavailable. MacReady forcing his way back into the base with dynamite is not heroic in the traditional sense. It's frightening. He survives by making himself too dangerous to ignore. He holds the group together by threatening to destroy them if they do not listen. And that's part of the bleakness of the film. The man who becomes the center does not restore trust. He substitutes control for trust because trust is gone. He can force cooperation, but he cannot heal the community. No one can. Then Norris collapses, and for a moment, the film seems to return to a recognizable emergency. A man appears to be having a heart attack. Cooper rushes to revive him, and under ordinary circumstances, a body in crisis would call forth compassion and medical care. But in The Thing, even that basic human instinct becomes dangerous. Cooper reaches in to save a life, and Norris's chest opens like a trap, severing his arms. It is one of the film's most grotesque images because it violates the expectation that suffering reveals vulnerability. Here, suffering becomes bait. A dying body cannot be trusted as a human body. When Norris's head detaches, sprouts legs, and tries to escape, the scene almost risks absurdity, but it works because it follows the film's internal logic perfectly. The Thing is not a single organism with a single center. Every part of it wants to live. Every fragment carries the same self preserving impulse. The head spider is horrifying because it makes visible what the film has been suggesting all along. This organism does not have personhood in any recognizable sense. It's distributed life without a stable self. It can divide and remain whole. It can lose a body and still continue. It is not one thing pretending to be many, it's many things masquerading as one. That brings us to the blood test, the great centerpiece of the film's paranoia. By this point, the men are not simply trying to find a monster. They're trying to force reality to answer them. Faces have failed. Voices have failed. Memory has failed. Authority has failed. Even the appearance of pain has failed. So MacReady turns to blood because blood feels like the last honest thing left. Something hidden beneath performance, more basic than speech, more difficult to imitate than behavior. If the face can lie, maybe the blood can't. The test is brutal because it depends on accepting the organism's most terrifying principle. Every piece of it is alive and self protective. MacReady is not looking for guilt or confession. He's provoking instinct. One by one, he touches the heated wires to the blood samples, while the men sit tied down, exposed, and terrified. The silence before each test feels almost unbearable because the test is supposed to create certainty. But before it does, it makes uncertainty more intense. Every negative result narrows the field without creating comfort. It only means the horror has not revealed itself yet. When Palmer's blood reacts, the moment does not feel like catharsis or relief, it feels like detonation. The blood screams and leaps away from the heat, and the room erupts because now the hidden truth has become visible. Palmer was sitting among them, speaking like a man, joking like a man, reacting like a man. And underneath the performance was something else entirely. The test works, but the fact that it works is horrifying because it confirms that perfect imitation was already in the room. The truth does not restore safety. It proves how unstable they have been the whole time. The Palmer transformation is terrifying because the men are tied down and forced to witness. They cannot run. They cannot distance themselves from the collapse of the human form. The body beside them breaks open into violence, and they have seen what a familiar shape can conceal. That's why the blood test does not become a triumphant turning point. It is a victory inside a collapsing system. It tells them something true, but it cannot give them back the world they inhabited before they knew that imitation could sit beside them unnoticed. After the blood test, the survivors have a temporary certainty, but not safety. They know who passed in the moment, but the larger problem remains unsolved. Blair is still isolated. The storm still surrounds them. The base is still compromised. And when they discover that Blair has been building a small spacecraft beneath the toolshed, the horror shifts again. The Thing was not merely hiding. It has been working. While the men have been unraveling psychologically, the organism has been preparing continuation. That's one of the coldest revelations in the film. The men are trapped in panic, suspicion, and exhaustion. The Thing is thinking past them. This is where the alienness of the organism becomes clearest. It does not share human fear. It does not need community, comfort, language, or meaning. It only needs a path to more life, more material, more forms to absorb. It's patient because it does not experience the crisis the way the men do. To the humans, the outpost is becoming a grave. To the Thing, it may still be a launching point. MacReady's final decision to destroy the base is not a last stand in the usual sense. It's containment by annihilation. He's not choosing victory. He's choosing to deny escape. The shelter cannot be saved because the shelter may become the vehicle of extinction. The generator, the rooms, the structures, the last signs of civilization in that white emptiness, all have to burn because survival has become morally dangerous. That's what makes the thing so bleak. The normal hope of horror, the hope that someone will make it out, has been inverted. The worst possible outcome is escape. The final creature is massive and grotesque, but by this point, we know that no single form is the point. The Blair thing is not the true form of the organism. It's another expression, another temporary arrangement of stolen biology. It erupts as a collage of bodies and shapes and violent possibility, less a creature than a living refusal to remain one thing. MacReady faces it with exhaustion rather than confidence. The explosion that follows is enormous, but it doesn't feel cleansing. Fire is the only answer left, and even fire does not give certainty. Then the film brings everything down to the final image, MacReady and Childs sitting across from each other in the cold while the base burns behind them. The great scene that has been analyzed and interpreted over and over again. The noise is gone, the panic is gone, the tests are gone. There's no more systems left to appeal to, just two figures, exhausted and freezing, each looking at the other as a question more than a person. Childs says he got lost in the storm. MacReady has no way to know whether this is true. Childs has no way to know what MacReady is. They share a drink, but even that gesture of human connection is contaminated by suspicion. The ending has endured because it refuses to answer the question that everyone wants answered. Is Childs the thing? Is MacReady? Are neither of them? The film gives enough clues to invite theories and not enough certainty to resolve any of them. And that refusal isn't a gimmick. It's the final expression of the movie's horror. An answer would let us leave. Certainty would resolve the world in some small way. Carpenter denies that restoration because the deepest horror of the film is not that the creature might still be alive. It's that the conditions for knowing what has happened have been destroyed. If Childs is the thing, the horror remains. If MacReady is the thing, the horror remains. If neither of them is the thing, they will likely freeze in the ruins of a world where trust has already been burned away. Every version is bleak. There is no clean outcome. That is the genius of the ending. It does not merely leave the plot unresolved, it leaves the wound open. The human face no longer guarantees the human person. Survival no longer guarantees humanity, and certainty, the thing everyone has been fighting for, never comes back. That's why the thing is such a powerful beginning to the Apocalypse trilogy. It doesn't show a world ending in the obvious sense. It shows the condition that makes the end imaginable. Identity collapses, trust collapses, meaning starts to loosen. And it all happens in a few rooms among a small group of men surrounded by snow. The apocalypse does not need a city skyline crumbling to begin. It can begin when one person looks at another and realizes recognition no longer works. The cosmic horror of the thing is not simply that an alien exists, it's that the alien reveals a universe in which human identity is not protected. To the organism, a person is not sacred, not singular, not finally meaningful. A person is material. A face is a mask. A body is an available form. Memory and behavior are tools for camouflage. It doesn't hate humanity. And that almost makes it worse. Hatred would at least acknowledge us as an enemy. The thing assimilates without reference and without malice. It reduces personhood to biology, and biology to material. And that's why the body horror is so disturbing. It's not gore for the sake of gore. It's metaphysical disgust made visible. Bodies split, open, mutate, and detach because the film is showing flesh cut loose from stable identity. A head can become a spider. A chest can become a mouth. A dog can become a flowering mass of muscle and tendrils. A man can be a man until suddenly he's not. The body, which should be a visible presence of a person, becomes a surface that cannot be trusted. The film does not need to be forced into larger themes to carry weight, but it does offer a kind of anti-creation vision. Creation, in many religious or philosophical traditions, depends on distinction. One thing separated from another. Form given meaning. Life ordered into difference. The thing moves the opposite direction. It collapses difference into sameness. It takes the many and consumes them into itself. Not communion, but assimilation. Not unity in love, but absorption without horror. It's a nightmare of life without personhood, form without presence, survival without self. And that's where the film leaves us. Staring into the fire with MacReady and Childs, waiting for an answer that will not come. In the next film, Prince of Darkness, Carpenter widens the wound. If the thing asks whether the person in front of us can still be known, Prince of Darkness asks whether the structure of reality itself has been misunderstood from the very beginning. But it starts here, in the cold, with the loss of the most basic human certainty that a face is a face, a friend is a friend, and the body sitting across from you belongs to someone that you can know. In the end, the terror of the thing is not that something alien wants to kill us. It's that something alien has discovered how to wear us. And once that becomes possible, every human certainty becomes fragile. The body, the voice, the memory, the friend, the self, all of it can be copied, questioned, and burned without giving you the one thing that everybody wants: certainty. Friends, thank you. We will be back covering Prince of Darkness soon. Chime in down below. Let me know, what's your favorite John Carpenter movie? Are you a fan of the Apocalypse trilogy, and what else you would like to see me cover in the future? But until next time, stay spooky. Peace.